What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to the Fearless Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff, teaching pastor and pastor of chaplaincy at the Fearless Family of Churches. And we're continuing on with a conversation on stress. We've talked so far about the different kinds of stress. We've talked about good stress, we've talked about bad stress, and we've talked about toxic stress or trauma. And we've had a couple of questions from you and from people listening about the different elements of stress. And one of the conversations we've had has revolved around the symptoms of stress. We've talked a little bit about physically how our bodies feel when we're stressed out, but how do we know when we are stressed out? And one of the elements that I work through with clients and individuals that I meet with is just to talk through all of the different ways that stress can affect us physically, emotionally, and mentally. And I like to go through something I call stress bingo. For those of you who may not be familiar with the game bingo, when you get 5 in a row and you call out bingo, I like to do something really similar with stress and just talk about different ways that we experience stress physically, emotionally, and mentally. And I like to walk through this in just kind of the same way that you would play bingo. I just kind of call out the different symptoms and I ask people to track for themselves how many they have in a row or how many of these items they experience. And so here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to make a mental list in a moment here of all the different types of symptoms that come along with stress, whether that's physically or emotionally or mentally. And as I talk through them, just keep a list for yourself. We'll have the bingo sheet in the podcast notes, and you can download this as well and do that tracking for yourself, but just follow along mentally as we talk through the different kinds of symptoms that stress produces. So here are some signs and symptoms of stress mentally. You have difficulty problem solving or concentrating. Stress impacts our short-term memory. Remember that chemical cortisol that we talked about? Cortisol in low amounts helps us to focus, but in large amounts can actually cause what is known as brain fog or difficulty concentrating. Also, stress can block short-term memory. We see this a lot in younger individuals who are preparing for a test and they procrastinated and decided to stay up late and cram the night before, and they have trouble recalling all of the information that they thought about or they read about, and they typically do worse on a test than they would have if they just got a good night's sleep and didn't stress out about the outcome of that test. Stress blocks short-term memory. So if you are a parent of children who are in the high school years, tell them not to cram before a test, but more importantly, make sure they get a good night's sleep. And maybe even do some deep breathing exercises. In fact, research has proven that if we do deep breathing before a test, if we take 2 minutes to center ourselves and take a deep breath, statistically speaking, we usually do 3 to 5% better on that test than if we didn't do that at all. Stress impacts our brain's ability to grasp onto concepts. We have trouble problem solving or concentrating. Same thing, you feel forgetful, or you have difficulty focusing or difficulty learning. That is a symptom of stress. If you withdraw from people, now I'm an introvert. If I'm around a large group of people, will need more time after the fact to gather my thoughts, to feel a little more grounded, to feel more centered, because I am an introvert by nature. But if I withdraw from people completely, I don't want to be around anyone, including the people in my life that I love the most. There is a good chance that I'm under some sort of stress. And if you find yourself withdrawing from people, you don't want to be around people, especially if you're used to being around large groups and you get along with a lot of people, but you just can't people today, or you can't people in this season. There's a chance that you're under some stress. Again, with teenagers, this is an indication that teenagers are going through a stressful period. If they isolate and withdraw, it's something to pay attention to. If you're aggressive or overly hostile, you have anger bubbling up on the surface and you're just waiting for somebody to screw up so you can lay the hammer down or you can vent that frustration, there's a good chance that you are under stress. Anger is not a primary emotion. It's a powerful one and one we need to pay attention to, but it's not a primary emotion. Stress can lead to anger. So if we feel stressed out, it may present as anger or hostility. And so if you're blowing up at people you love, you may have stuff going on under the surface. One of the things I tell clients on a regular basis, work your stuff out before you take it out on the people you love or the people you work with. Stress impacts the way that we respond to people, especially in aggression or hostility. Maybe you have a loss of humor, or things that were funny don't seem funny anymore. If you like, for my generation, watching movies like Tommy Boy or comedies that came from characters from SNL, Saturday Night Live years ago, and you watch it and it's just the jokes aren't funny anymore, or you have trouble laughing at it, there's a change in the way that you appreciate humor. It's an indication that there may be something more going on. You are overly rigid, or you feel like a loss of spontaneity, or a change in a plan leaves you feeling increasingly more frustrated. Listen, that's something to pay attention to, because there's an indication there that things are not internally and emotionally going on well with you. A few years ago, I had a friend who went through a major health crisis. And then his wife went through a major health crisis. And after the two of them recovered from these serious illness issues that they were under, he started to notice that she would lose her bananas when someone moved things in the refrigerator from where she had them to where she found them. And she was operating under a profound amount of stress that had occurred because of what she'd went through and what he'd went through medically. And it was presenting as freaking out whenever things that were in her control were no longer operating in the way that she wanted them to. When we feel like life is out of control, we tend to fixate on what we can control. And so that's an indication that there's something more going on. If you're secretive about medication or alcohol or recreational pharmaceuticals, and I'll just be honest here, addiction rates are up. And so many of us are not dealing with stress well. If you are hiding alcohol or gummies or other drugs, or you're hiding elements of stress relief that you know aren't necessarily healthy for you, whether that is pornography or other destructive materials, or over shopping and you're hiding receipts, or you're hiding how you're spending the money, that's an indication that there's more going on. And you should pay attention to that. If you have a reduction in productivity, you keep working harder and harder and harder, but you find like the results are not adding up to the effort that you're putting in, there may be an element of stress involved. And those are all some of the mental sides of stress. Now let's talk about the emotional ones and even the spiritual ones. For those of you who are people of faith, depression and sadness. Now I know if you're talking about stress, usually people think about anxiety with stress, which that's true, but also depression is a byproduct of stress. I like to tell people that it's like a roller coaster. You can only ride so high before you start to drop down. And if you're in a long season of stress, it can present as depression. You don't have motivation to do anything. You feel overly sad. It's tough for you to find joy in life. You feel yourself falling into hopelessness or despair. That's an indication that there's more going on in your life. Anxiety, fear, panic. You feel panic attacks. Yes, that's an indication. Physically, your body is trying to tell you that emotionally or life circumstances are creating something of havoc for you. Stress can lead to anxiety. Stress can lead to a sense of panic or high alertness where you're constantly in that fight or flight mode. It can also lead to panic attacks. Panic attacks are serious. If you feel like your heart is racing, you feel like things are closing in, you feel like you can't breathe, a lot of people think they're having a heart attack. Stress can cause physical symptoms that are really severe, and you need to pay attention to. Boredom. You're so stressed out that nothing brings you joy. And you can't work up the energy to do anything. You just want to sit, be a blob. That can be an indication that there's more going on there. You feel exhausted or emotionally fatigued. Physically, maybe you feel fine, but you just don't have any energy, and you go to bed tired and you wake up tired, and it's in your soul and it's in your emotions. It's an indication that maybe there's more going on. Listen, if you're going to bed tired and you're waking up tired, it's probably not your pillow. It's probably not your mattress. It's probably your stress levels. If you're restless and fidgety, as we've talked about in previous episodes, our bodies physically respond to stress. They hold on to stress. And so if we're really, really stressed out, we may find that our limbs shake, our feet shake, we may fidget, we may move back and forth on our feet, and we can't be still for long periods of time. That's an indication that there's more going on. Let me just say a word about that. I've talked with a lot of parents who have children that can't sit still. And the immediate thing that they think about is, does my kid have ADHD? Let me just say something that may be shocking to you. Social anxiety and ADHD mirror symptomatically across the board in almost every category. Just because a child can't sit still doesn't mean they have ADHD. Let's say that again. Just because a child can't sit still doesn't mean they have ADHD. They may be stressed out, and stress can manifest physically in not being able to be still for long periods of time. So before you jump to a diagnosis and a label, it may be worth just asking the question, is it possible that my child is stressed out about something that they can't verbally communicate, and so their behavior is telling me something different? Behavior is communication, period. So when we are not still, it could be because of stress and not necessarily because of an ADHD diagnosis. So just a thought there. If you have difficulty praying, if you are a person of faith, or if you regularly go to church and the music can move you, but you're in a season where no matter what the song is, you just can't connect, or you have trouble focusing on the Bible, or you have trouble focusing on a written piece of material from a religious book, it may be stress. There's a passage in Matthew where Jesus actually says that the anxieties of life can choke the word within us, meaning when we're anxious about the future, or we're worried, or we're stressed out, we have trouble holding on to the very words of the Bible that are helpful for us. So that could be a symptom of stress. You have spiritual doubts or questions about faith or life or spirituality. When you're finding yourself in a place saying things like, why, God, would you do this? Why is this happening? Why me? God, what are you up to? Or you're questioning that greater power of the universe, there may be a chance that there's more going on in your life in a stress-related way than you're aware of. You are cynical or negative or critical. I work with a lot of people in the construction field, and I work with a lot of men. And I also live in an area of the country in Michigan, West Michigan, where sarcasm is like a second language. And if you don't know how to navigate sarcasm, you're going to have a lot of trouble with relationships. Sarcasm is different than cynicism. Cynicism is where we are openly negative, openly critical. We are mistrusting of the people that we typically trust the most, and we are just plain not fun to be around, and we are toxic to the people around us. And if you're listening to this and a person comes to mind who is openly cynical, you know what I'm talking about. They're the people that you try to avoid at all costs because they drag you down with them. Cynicism is a telltale sign of stress. In fact, it is the number one sign of burnout, which is workplace stress. And so if you know someone is cynical or you are finding yourself being overly cynical, there's a chance that emotionally something is not right and stress is getting the better of you. From a physical side, if you have headaches or neck aches, probably not your pillow. If you have reoccurring stress headaches, you have reoccurring migraines, maybe it's a medical thing. It also might be an emotional thing that is impacting you medically or physically. It might not be your pillow. It might not be the appropriate amount of sitting or standing that you're doing. If you feel yourself driving and your shoulders are tensing up and you have to take a deep breath and force them back down, there's a good chance that your body is physically trying to tell you about some emotional things that are going on or some circumstances that are creating stress in your life. Similarly, if you have GI issues, so gut issues, so nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, frequent trips to the bathroom, that is a physical response to stress. It could be the Chinese food that you ate last night. It could have been the gas station sushi. It could be that you ate something bad. But if it happens on an ongoing basis and there's no dietary reason for it, it could be a stress-related issue. For those of you who have young children, one of the primary ways that children tell us they're stressed out is by saying, "Mommy, my tummy hurts." "Mommy, my tummy doesn't feel good." Or "Daddy, my tummy hurts." When a child says that, typically it's not what they ate. They're stressed out or worried about something. In fact, with our family, with our son, my son Pike, we say to him when he says, "My tummy hurts," we say, "What are you thinking about, buddy?" And so if you have small children, you might actually do better in that conversation by talking to them about what they're thinking about or what they're feeling. And that will help to relieve some of the physical symptoms that they have. And for adults as well, when we worry and when we stress out, sometimes we get a tummy ache. Sometimes we have gut issues. Sometimes we go to the bathroom more. A lot of that has to do with our body producing adrenaline and our body responding to that adrenaline. Do you grind your teeth at night while you sleep or in meetings? A lot of us hold tension in our jaw, and our stress is held in our jaw. Sometimes just forcing your tongue down into the bottom of your mouth. So just do that with me for a second. As you're listening to this, force your tongue down all the way to the bottom of your mouth. Can you feel your jaw relaxing? Can you feel things opening up? When we're stressed out, the opposite happens, that we tense up. So one of the things you can do if you're feeling stressed is just force your tongue down and just let things open up a little bit, relieve some of that tension physically, which can also help to relieve some of that stress emotionally as well. You feel shaky or dizzy. This is a big one. A lot of times when people are stressed out, they start to feel a little dizzy or they feel a little shaky. That could be your blood sugar dropping. It could also be your body responding to adrenaline or cortisol levels. A lot of us, when we have too much coffee, get the shakes, and that's because cortisol is triggered and adrenaline is triggered by caffeine. That sends that response, that body releasing all of those chemicals. And stress can be a way that impacts all of that. And then there's sleep problems. If you have trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, you have trouble with sleeping in general, you wake up and you just cannot get back to sleep because your thoughts are racing, your mind is going, that could be an indication that there's stress. Remember, our bodies physically hold on to stress while we sleep. You have cardiac palpitations, heart problems. Stress actually increases the risk of heart disease, and lowering your stress lowers your risk of heart disease. And I remember a few years ago, I went through a really stressful period. I was working full-time at a church. I had a private practice. I had some clients who were really struggling. I was a new father, and it was just a crazy season of life. And I started getting these heart palpitations. I started thinking that I had some heart problems, like AFib or something like that. I went to the doctor and they hooked me up to monitors, and I had to wear this whole thing around, and they did all these tests only to find that physically there was no reason why I should be having these heart issues. They couldn't see anything. And then they brought up the question, is it possible that I was stressed out? And I was. And I hadn't acknowledged that. And so I needed to make some major changes to alleviate some stress and put in some practices in place that I would tell clients to do, but I wasn't doing myself. And that changed the game for me physically. And I've been a lot healthier since. So maybe if you've got some chest pain, or you got some heart issues, or you've got some heart palpitations that are just, they won't go away. Medication might be able to fix it. Maybe there is something that you need to look into, and you should go to a doctor to get that checked out, just like I did. But it's also possible that stress is a factor. If you have a change in appetite, food that used to be good just doesn't sound good. Things that you like to eat, they just don't sound good anymore. Might be a stress thing. Again, cortisol production actually decreases our appetite. We don't feel hungry when we're stressed out. Our body is telling itself, listen, we need all of the blood flow for emergency use and power in the immediate. And so we cannot redirect that blood flow. We cannot do that to the stomach because we've got to have power now. And so the stomach shuts down a little bit. We just don't feel hungry. That's cortisol working. Backaches. Tension in your lower back. This is super important for men, but also super important for women. I have a friend who's a physical therapist, and she says that women hold their stress in the lower half of their body primarily. So basically from the middle of their back all the way down. It's held in the back and the buns and the legs, and specifically in the calf muscles. She tells people that if they're trying to get rid of some of the stress in their body, they have to do leg raises and calf raises to help just flush out some of that physical stress that is coming from emotional stress or some of those toxins in the body. And so those are the symptoms. Those are the symptoms from the mental side, the emotional side, the medical or the physical side. And I think it's really important to say if you have at least 3 of these, and I will let you discount 1 for a bad day, but if you have at least 3 of these symptoms, you should pay attention to that. If you have at least 3 of these symptoms, and some of us have more than that, reach out to somebody. Go see your doctor. Talk to him about stress. Go see a counselor. Give us a call in the chaplaincy. Send an email to chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. We would love to help give you some ways to process through your stress. Keep that conversation going. Think through strategies that you can employ to be a healthier version of you. Next time, we're going to jump into a conversation on coping skills, ways to deal with stress. And I'm going to invite a friend of mine to join me, another therapist in the area, to help talk about the different ways that we can process through stress. So if we triggered something for you today, if something kicked off for you, or you're like, man, I've got some of those symptoms, I need to deal with that, Josh, I need some help, join us for our next episode as we take another stab at dealing with stress in our lives. That's all I got. We'll talk to you later.